Bob Calloway, I have a message of joining, but it seems to be kind of frozen a little bit. So hopefully that's just some odd delay.
Yeah, it looks like he's in the meeting with no audio or video connected yet.
Yeah, and I'm getting what I'm seeing is a joining from the waiting room, but stuck there. So, huh.
Heads up, I got to drop 30 minutes
Okay.
to the call. Got a good excuse, an LF webinar.
Mhm.
So
Awesome. Wish the best.
thank you.
Okay. Looks like Bob has left, and hopefully he will try again. And
Yeah, I'm on.
hopefully. Oh, you're on. Okay, great. Yep. There was something weird happening on you were stuck in some strange limbo. So I'm glad you're in.
Yeah, I started floating for a minute and at home, and it was a little weird, but everything came back to the ground, so all good.
Excellent.
All right, so I know we're 3.5 minutes in. Just a reminder for folks to put your name in the attendance. Start off the meeting with an apology between being in Dublin last week for the event, taking a few days off for vacation to tour Ireland, and then flying home yesterday from that and digging out of my inbox. I didn't necessarily have, I didn't put in the time as that I had hoped to build out the agenda for today. I did throw in some things that have been on the back of my mind, so maybe we'll go through them in terms of kind of the next steps post kind of getting 112 merged, but give them maybe just use them as discussion points and get some general feedback or ideas around how best to proceed on a couple of these different topics. But today may end up being a lighter agenda day anyway. And I know we have a few folks here. It looks like from the TAC that are need to drop or won't be able to make it due to PTO or other things. So. With that, looking across the invite list, I guess, who is on point from the GTI project to give their update?
So, Bob, I'm sorry to chime in here. The
That's okay.
GTI project is not ready to give their update at this point. They've had a big event over the weekend, the GNU Cauldron, and so that has just added more sort of to the community conversation there. So we will have them come in a couple of weeks to do their update, if that's all right. It's just they're very fresh stuff that they're working through. And so they weren't prepared to do that today.
That's fine. If I could, yeah, we can figure out exactly to which date to move them to on the calendar. That'll be fine. I know we've got with the upcoming holidays in November and December, it may be tricky to swap some stuff around, but we can figure it out. All right, and then I know we had an update from the Securing Software Repositories Working Group. Jacques, I see you on. Are you going to be speaking on that today?
I will be, with the proviso that I didn't realize this was coming, so I'm just making it up on the spot. Very briefly, securing software repos is going well. We've got representation from a number of communities, Java, Ruby, Python, Node, folks from Cargo Shop regularly. We've also had visits from folks who work in Gentoo and PHP. Obviously, we'd like to grow that in future. But, things have sort of turned to the nitty gritty of getting stuff done. One thing that I've been championing myself, which I hope to bring before TAC sometime in the next month or so, is getting together a shared help desk facility or operation for various ecosystems where the work is mostly volunteer driven. The context there is that we would all like to roll out MFA to a wider audience, to larger cohorts. But of course, once you roll out MFA, you have to deal with MFA resets. And those are quite sensitive security-wise, quite intensive. So the idea basically is everybody is already swamped in these volunteer communities. It would be nice if the OpenSSF was able to sponsor the availability of at least one person who could pick up that support burden. Also in the proposal will be a request for funding for contracts to be let out for developing the tools and integrations with various ecosystems so that there is basically the lowest privilege necessary to achieve the task in a consistent way across the different ecosystems. Because of course that, becomes a fairly juicy point of attack in itself. Those are the things I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm happy to answer any questions people might have as well.
No, I appreciate you doing that, Chuck. The thing that popped into my mind was more around, let's, just for the sake of discussion, let's say that we do move forward with setting up the sort of shared help desk. How could we generate events to get to be published, maybe perhaps to the broader ecosystem, to say this particular user had their MFA token reset, and what other events might we look to generate in the life cycle of a user on a package repository or a package on a package repository? What other events that should we be emitting as metadata that would help to provide greater assurances to how that help desk would be operating in as transparent a way as possible, so that it's not just viewed as another point of attack, or as another perhaps nefarious user that's going to manipulate that responsibility. So thinking through how could we actually build that out is the idea that jumped in my mind. I know we've talked about that a little bit in some of the discussions in the working group, but no, that would be I think that's exactly the sort of proposal that the TAC would love to hear and hopefully support it going forward.
Yeah,
So
for the context of folks who
Yeah,
haven't heard this before, the concept is essentially that we publish various kinds of events into the transparency log. So things like the package was pushed, the package was yanked, a person had an MFA reset as a security sensitive operation, a name was resurrected. Like there are all these sorts of things that a monitor wants to know, or ideally would be able to know. That go into the transparency log that'll make it a lot more secure. And then you can ratchet up the bar of things that you need to be true in order to accept a dependency. No, thanks for the point. I'll pay more attention to the reminders next time.
no worries.
Hey, Jacques, I think it's also worth pointing out the scale we're dealing with, because I think MFA is one of those things people think like, oh, big freaking deal, just reset the token. But we're talking probably millions of developers, right?
Yes, collectively across them, there would be at least as an order of magnitude, order of a million between NPM, PyPI, Ruby Gems, and Maven.
A quick clarification though. Hopefully not all of them need MFA resets. So
No, absolutely.
So do we have any idea of scale on that?
Yeah, so the point is that we want to roll it out to more people.
Sure.
So at the moment, PyPI, Ruby Gems, and NPM have rolled out to quite limited cohorts, and that's led to support burdens of various size. So in the case of Ruby Gems, it applies to the top 100 gems. So I think it affects about 150 or 200 people. We're already seeing 5 requests a week.
Okay,
PyPI,
5 requests per week for how many developers?
For several hundred. PyPI sees an estimated 10 requests per week on, I think, several thousand developers. So, make your jokes here if you wish. So basically, but it turns out that the rate is actually relatively, with those 2 data points, and of course I'm fitting a very, very tenuous regression line. It turns out that there's a relatively stable sort of relationship to the number of packages. I'll just have to pull up my proposal to see what it was, because I didn't memorize that. You're looking at about basically 0.025 requests per package per week. And that relationship roughly holds between Ruby Gems and PyPI, which are the ones I have data for. NPM have their own data, but don't know if they can share it yet. And I don't have data for Maven.
That's actually exactly what I was hoping for. Some rule of thumb ballpark. So as it scales up, we hopefully have an idea of what we're scaling to.
Yeah, it'll be part of the proposal basically says that we start with 1 person, and ecosystems increase their cohorts until that person is swamped. and then we stop and we come back for a proposal to say we need to add a second person, and so on, until we're satisfied that we've gone about as far as MFA as we should. Now, if you had the magic wand and you were designing a package system from scratch today for a popular ecosystem, you would just make MFA mandatory from the start. Right? This would save a great deal of hassle about people feeling that they've been rug pulled. But of course, we don't live in that world, so we have to roll it out progressively. And the other part is literally that it's attention intensive. If we are not very careful about protecting against social engineering attacks, then we turn what is 2 factors into 1.5 factors.
That's still an
so-
extraordinary number. I mean, I'm doing the quick calculation of 25,000 requests a week if you do 1 million packages.
Yes,
Yikes.
NPM are already doing a lot of requests per week. They have multiple service desk agents at the moment who do deal with a very wide variety of workloads, but a lot of that does come back to MFA. So formally, I will bring this before you. Like this is just like the informal. I still want to put it to a vote in the group, bring it to TAC, and then get TAC's blessing, and then send it off to governing board for consideration. Abhishek.
Yeah, Yak, I was thinking like, can this be something that can be vendored out? Because that might be much more simpler, like since we are talking about all the ecosystems. Have you thought on that front, like let's say 2 dedicated people or 3 dedicated people over a year, and they will provide support to different ecosystems?
I hadn't thought about engaging a vendor. My experience with setting up help desks is somewhere between 0 and 0. So I'm happy to take guidance or advice.
Cool. Any other questions for Jacques on this update? All right, yeah, as that evolves along, I'm certainly happy to hear more and happy to help push that discussion forward. So thanks for that. All right, next on the agenda, I had just thrown in, and maybe I'll hand it over to Brian here if he's up for it, maybe just to give a quick recap of last Tuesday in Dublin, which was OpenSSF Day EU. So I guess Brian, to put you on the spot, any just quick synopsis, highlights you want to share with the broader TAC? I know we had some of the folks in attendance, but not everybody was able to make it. So.
Right. No, we had a nice crowd. We had I think some drop off because of COVID. There were a fair number of people who didn't make it because of that. But we had about 110 people click in the morning. So the room had about that many, and it looked like it was maybe 1/3 folks who had traveled into Dublin, 2/3 folks who were kind of new to the community, that kind of thing. That's my rough kind of guess. We haven't done like a post-event survey yet or anything. I was really happy with all the presentations. It covered a pretty wide sweep of the different things going on at the OpenSSF, and concluded with a fireside chat with Jamie Thomas, our chairwoman, and had a speaker dinner the night before. That was a really nice way to build some bonds as well. So yeah, I think the attendance numbers were a bit lower than I would have liked, but we also had, let me get the specific number from the live stream. We had, on virtual, it shows 113 in the AM sessions and 88 in the PM sessions. We're watching virtually as well. So total reach of about 240 people. I know some folks stuck around for some of the other Open Source Summit Europe sessions, was really glad to connect with the European community while we were there.
Awesome, thanks, Brian, and also a special thanks and shout out to Krog for playing the role of MC again, and also donning the swan hat yet again. So appreciate you doing that. Awesome.
There are photos that we'll send around too pretty soon.
Yeah. And also for Khalil, I don't know if Khalil's on, but thanks for bailing us out with at least for my talk, we had some technical difficulties getting the laptops all coordinated. So thanks for everybody who got that done as well. All right. Krob, speaking of you, I wanted to give you a a couple minutes to maybe quickly recap the thread that you had started on the mailing list around kind of a shared reference architecture / diagram, kind of encompassing the efforts that are going on within the OpenSSF.
I would love to. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know if folks can see that after I hit the button. All right. In conversations both last week and in days of yore, I've found it a lot of people that aren't part of the working groups or aren't part of the foundation already find the foundation a little bit intimidating to figure out where some good jumping on points are. We have a lot of activities going on, a lot of amazing work. And I'm glad that the TAC has started to formally talk to each of the working groups to get more formal updates. I think that's definitely going to help share some of the messaging. But for newcomers, it's a little challenging to figure out where to jump on board. So something we did as part of the BEST working group is we did a little reference architecture that described each of the member projects and efforts within the group and tried to show what the intentions were, kind of what the theme of the group was, and to try to help explain for newcomers how to jump on board and participate and collaborate with us. So I was thinking at more of a foundation level, and I just threw together a very simple diagram that I'm showing here based off of information about a month or more back. This was what was in our web page and our Git repo about each, and then Brian's mobilization plan proposal. So I just quickly swagged out, these are the working groups at the time. We would need to add end user working group. And these were the projects or initiatives under each. And then with the hexagon, I added in the proposal for the alignment of the SIGs from the mobilization plan. And shot a note out to the mailing list, and I got some pretty good feedback. So I later today plan on sending out a doodle to anyone interested so that we can take the idea behind this diagram and shape it into something, and potentially it could be a couple different artifacts to help describe, all the efforts of the foundation, and then try to show some relationships. And then, if we can get some graphical artistry, potentially even, hyperlink it. We have a diagram out on the web page. Somebody's curious, what's the deal with alpha and omega? Boop, they hit the diamond there and it links over potentially to that GitHub repository or web page, whatever's relevant. And again, I got some interest on the mailing list of folks that were interested in collaborating, got some opinions on some different ways to present the material, but just at its most basic form, I was trying to put everything on one page, and then we can decide how we want to, what the final form of this might look like, whether it's like a user journey, or maybe it's a series of diagrams. There's a lot of different ways we can share this out. So I'm open to questions. I'll start with Sarah. Thank you. The diagram I did share out to the mailing list, and I will share out again later today when I do my doodle. And if anyone's interested, we'll try to find a time that's time zone appropriate for everybody, so we can start collaborating on this and figure out what it might look like.
Thank you. I also got the link from Abhishek in chat, and we've got another link from Arnaud. So thank you all for supporting me for not reading my email.
No worries. There's a lot of email. We're busy people. As you can see in the diagram, there's a lot going on. Any other questions or suggestions?
I've got some other diagrams I've used in the past that I keep meaning to share with you, so I will share with you.
Yeah, and my experience in working with any community, it's much easier to start with something on the page and then make drastic changes from there, as opposed to everyone getting together with a blank sheet of paper and a whiteboard and starting fresh. So this will give us a starting point, and the final delivery might look the same, it might look different. And keep an eye out on the mailing lists for the doodle request. And please, if you're interested in participating, cast your vote for a time. And then, once that group starts to get together, we'll have a couple meetings. I expect we'll come back to the TAC with some examples of what we're looking for to formally kind of share. Bob.
Yeah, just +1. I think great work. I'd love to see this continue to evolve. I guess the thought that jumps into my mind with this, and it also gets to something that is the last bullet on the agenda today, is getting that nice graphic artistry to occur. How could we actually render this on the openssf.org website? I think, describing the foundation and the activities that's there, I think having some visual representation that aligns back to kind of the technical vision that the foundation has, that we as the TAC are responsible for authoring and maintaining. I think connecting both the words that we have in the vision and even some sort of a way to, connect this visual picture, and how do you go through that discovery process to figure out, okay, here's the goal, here's the thing that we're trying to create in the industry and within the ecosystem. Here are these specific working groups and sub-projects that tie together. I think tying this together with a visualization, I think really helps to sell the story. So I think looking not only just to publish it and say, here's a diagram off on the web for people that want to go learn, but really leaning into this more and trying to connect some of those points, I think would be a huge win.
I agree.
Once we have the data, right, and we're confident that what we have here is reflective of like what we are and where we want to be, we can absolutely submit these beautiful drafts, shall we call them, to a graphic artist. We have a creative services desk and a support process. They can turn stuff like this around fairly quickly, especially if they have a great basis like the one Probe has to start from. So it would be maybe a week or two to get something that is visually pretty and postable on our website if and when you're ready for that.
Great. Abhishek.
I think as we are making this diagram, there might be even opportunity to move things around. So think about, let's say when All-Star project started, right? We didn't know the right working group, so maybe it might be better to have it in another one. Similar to that is like security reviews, right? So for example, you see code audits in securing critical projects, whereas currently security reviews is in identifying security threats. So there might be, as a group, we could think about if we want to restructure some things or move some projects around for better clarity.
That's an excellent idea. Thank you, Abhishek.
Brian.
Yeah, there is also the landscape tool that is obviously widely used in CNCF, and we could use more here. I think one of the challenges with a graphic is keeping it up to date. And the nice thing about the landscape tool is that updating it is a simple update to, I believe, a YAML file on via Git. So it also addresses a little bit aesthetic questions people might have about why did you put the other project above mine and things like that. It's kind of more programmatic and algorithmic in how it generates things. What I don't know is if it has kind of 2 levels of detail, and it certainly doesn't put things in kind of grouped circles like this, but it does provide flexibility in other ways to kind of render things. There's just the main benefit would be then you don't have to do a cycle back through Creative to add a logo or add a project when something gets created by a working group.
Yeah, the CNCF trail map was actually a suggestion, another view of the data potentially, depending on kind of the audience. But yeah, I agree. We don't want to make it somebody's full-time job to monkey around with a diagram all day.
Yeah, Dan.
Hi, quick question. Taking a look at the diagram made me think about there are a number of things that are in so-called incubation. And I believe that the new process allows for incubation items within working groups, as my read. And I just wanted to make sure that that gets reflected on whatever we end up with, that there's a differentiation of things that are incubating, unless I'm deeply mistaken about the process.
Yeah, we have different phases of the life cycle. Some of these projects are in. It was not my intention to try to showcase that. I was just purely doing a quick and dirty diagram, what existed. And then, as the group, if we saw value in it, we can figure out, maybe we color code something that
Yeah, I just think
yellow
it
is
would
incubating.
benefit from being able to show from a positive perspective, being able to show these things are growing. These things are like more mature work items, to be able to show kind of the life cycle of things as they go through.
Yeah, and I'll make a note of that, Dan, as we get the doodle group together. That'll be something we can consider, a view, either the main view or some ancillary view that shows the kind of stage in the life cycle. I think there's value in that.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. Sorry, I'm laughing at the Hotel California and the IBM references with Phil. But no, I think to the point that Jay just made, which is hey, this is a great start, but continuing to evolve and making sure that we leverage it to its full potential, I think would go a long way to, I think as both Krog and I said, it in the helps of framing our work and ultimately enabling people to really understand the activity within the foundation and how it connects back with the vision statements, and is super useful. So I think, the old adage of a picture tells 1,000, or I forget it. Picture is worth 1,000 words or something like that. So I think doing this here would really help to tell that story. So super excited to see Krog, you put this forward, as well as I look forward to the doodle and continuing that conversation.
And I look forward to everybody's suggestions and contributions as we move forward. Thanks.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Next on the agenda, I wanted to give a brief update from the governing board meeting, which happened the 8th of September, so not quite 2 weeks ago. Two things I wanted to call out to the TAC's attention. One is that there was a discussion at the governing board, both in terms of, as you may have seen, the meeting minutes, a redacted version of the meeting minutes are going to be made public going forward. In addition to that, I made a motion that was accepted by the governing board to include TAC members on the invites for the governing board meetings going forward, in what I guess I would characterize as the open portion of the meeting, being that, again, we want to drive as much transparency and alignment as possible. However, there are things that are in the governing board's charter, things like funding requests or staffing issues or salary issues, where it would not be appropriate to necessarily have non-governing board members in attendance. So that motion was voted and approved on. So you will likely see invites coming for the future TAC meeting, or for the future governing board meetings, rather. Would certainly encourage, if folks would like to attend, feel free to. Again, we'll try to make clear that delineation between what topics on the agenda are closed, and therefore you would not be welcome to attend. But again, I think that would be rather an exception rather than the norm. Also, the other thing I wanted to call out was a continued conversation around the creation of what's currently being termed as the governance subcommittee. This is a continuation of the same dialogue that I brought up on a previous TAC meeting, around making sure that we do have effective communication between the three-legged stool of governing board, TAC, and the foundation staff. And so that subcommittee, and it is one of those situations where we had to create a subcommittee to form a separate subcommittee. That the formation subcommittee is wrapping up its work, hopefully within the next few weeks, to make a permanent subcommittee. To think of it as, going back to Pareto's principle, right? 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. A governing board is already, more than, I think 40 plus members, and I may be wrong, but we're talking a massive group of largely senior executives. We need to have a smaller forum, not to create a shadow organization or anything of that matter, but just to make sure that we have a high fidelity, high bandwidth space to try to drive progress between these three different groups. So there was some discussion at the governing board around kind of how the progress that was made, some guiding principles. Ian Bertuccio, as well as many other folks in that kind of committee for the subcommittee are working to pull together a document. As soon as that's in a state that's ready for review, we'll certainly be sharing that out with everybody here to get that input and feedback. But that's I guess the 2 points I wanted to call out from the governing board meeting last time. All right, any questions on that before we go on to the next 2 items, the last 2 items on the agenda? Okay. I listed it here as next steps on, in my mind, I think of this as what do we do after 112 is now merged? But in essence, I guess I wanted to ask a question out to my fellow TAC members of, I think of there being 2 groups of work. One being a set of continued and hopefully finalizing some housekeeping type work that it kind of needs to get done in terms of making sure that we have all of the charters approved and ratified wherever we don't have them ratified. Do we have all the links and the tables up to date? I think we've done a fair bit of work getting some updates to start to occur on a regular basis to the TAC, which has been good. But getting everything in, all of our working groups, all of our projects, getting them into a known good state would be, I guess, a finishing out that housekeeping is maybe a more succinct way to put it. It is something that I would like to see some progress on. To that end, I think having now 112 in place, I think we need to classify projects based on their current life cycle to say who is sandbox, who's incubating, who's graduated, right? So I think there's a bit of a evaluation process that needs to occur to clean those things up. Okay, these are the thoughts that jumped to my mind. I wanted to at least leave a little bit of space for other TAC members or other folks that had ideas in terms of again, more of the tactical notions of how do we want to proceed now that 112 is done. Are there things that I'm missing? Are there things that you disagree with? We'd be curious to get other folks' thoughts. And Crow, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that we need to, now that we have a framework, we need to go back and implement and execute on that framework. I can say that my current workload is redlined and I don't have any additional capacity to go through and do a bunch of work. So I would welcome assistance from the foundation staff, and maybe a proposal might be maybe we set up a series of interviews with the working group leads, reviewing the existing charter and maybe making PRs to submit the desired changes. But I do not have time to do that alone. But I absolutely, it needs to be done. And then I like the idea of going through and at what stage of the life cycle are these different efforts in, so that we can, color code the diagram. I need help.
Yeah, +1 to the being time constrained. I think we all find ourselves in that situation. Arnaud.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to the status and the life cycle of each group out there, probably the most practical way, although it may not be the lightest process, is to get every group to submit, an application. We have a process in place with templates people need to fill out and submit to the TAC, and I think that would be the most appropriate. And we can allow, because we can grandfather groups, so that groups that are quite advanced may already, go straight to, let's say graduated the status if they think they qualify, without forcing them to go through every stage, because that would be adding an extra level of pain, which I don't think is necessary. But I think we can leave to each group, that determination, which level they want to apply for. But I think using the process is probably the best way, because remember that, built into this process, there is this function that it will actually document where the groups are in the project life cycle, leaving an actual trace in the TAC repository.
Brian.
You wouldn't want to just grandfather all the existing working groups and projects into, maybe that's an inappropriate term, I apologize for that, but just default them into graduated? Are there? I don't know if there's some exceptions for some projects that are not considered graduated at this point, but yeah, I would assume. Are we asking really every working group and every project to reapply for essentially its role and justification at OpenSSF?
Arno, did you want to respond to that before I do?
No, I have to admit, I'm not completely sure I understand what Brian you're saying. I don't know if it's different from what I'm saying or not.
Maybe
okay.
I can try to.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
No, I thought you were suggesting that every working group and project reapply using the framework for a certain status at OpenSSF, rather than considering them all as they've existed today as graduated, and that the process applies to new stuff coming in.
Well, I would definitely not take it for granted they're all graduated. So no, I think that's a leap.
Yeah, I guess to the spirit of both of the points I think you raised, I can't say that I would be a fan of having every single project within the OpenSSF have to go through the start at sandbox and work their way through. That's going to generate a lot of paperwork. I do think a judgment call may need to be made on certain projects around, well, what stage are they fundamentally at? I think we do have a variety of efforts that are at different levels of maturity, different levels of engagement, and maintainers from different levels of different entities. So I guess, but part of the discussion is like, if we force all of the projects to go back and start from state zero, that's a lot of, for potentially a fair bit of paperwork and bureaucracy for very little benefit. And in the flip side, just setting a default of everything is graduated that exists today and everything new needs to go through the process doesn't quite feel right to me as well. I guess I'm looking for, like, is it just we need to have a proposal brought forward ultimately by a TAC member who's responsible for, liaisoning with a particular working group to say, hey, these are the projects within the working group, which, like Crow for, the best and not so best working groups that you're engaged with. Would you come in with a proposal of a leveling that's appropriate for that and drive a conversation around that? So do we want to make it one-on-one and try to delegate the work out? Do we want and do we want to call for volunteers to go through the entire list and come up with a subjective recommendation? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, in my own mind. What do we think is the most fair, equitable, and time-effective way to go through, cleaning up the state of things here? Jacques.
I guess with securing software repos and with end users working group, which I'm involved with, I think the current sort of view of the world is that we're incubating. Like we followed the guidance that existed at the time to get to the incubating status. I think we're likely to grandparent, if that's the term we're going to accept, the working groups that were sort of there in the inaugural working groups, so to speak. Makes sense to me, but I think it does need to be sorted out where possible.
Yeah, and perhaps this is me being loose with language, so apologies for that. I'm only speaking about projects here. I believe the working group lifecycle, did not receive major structural changes in the PR 112, whereas we did not have an actual structure for projects themselves. So that may be another way to limit the scope of this discussion, to say leave all working groups at the state that they currently are, which I believe they're all technically incubating at this point. But going back and doing that same sort of evaluation for projects was what I intended by that point. That caused a bunch of hands to go up. So that clearly was a controversial point. Brian, looks like you were first.
And I see Abhishek just didn't think this was appropriate, but I think just having each working group send an email to the TAC with its proposed slate of here's the projects that are mature and graduated, here's the ones that are still incubating, and have that be then accepted by the TAC if they agree with it. would be, you know, an efficient process to get us to here's the subset of ones that are still to be focused on and incubating.
Krog?
Arnaud was first. I yield
It's
to my
okay.
friend from France.
Thank you, Crow.
Sorry, I think I have my own order of who I saw first, but then my list says otherwise. So
It's all
so
right. I mean,
go ahead.
I just wanted to remind people what the process, using the process entails, right? I mean, there is a template for the state you want to apply for, the status, right? And you basically issue a pull request against the TAC repository with that template filled out for your project or your working group, stating why you think you qualify. And it's not a very, cumbersome process. And so I think it's a very effective way to get everything cleaned up, is to allow every group to decide which state they want to apply for, filling out the form, issuing a pull request. I think we all know how to do that pretty efficiently. And then the TAC can quickly go through this offline, approve them, and that's it. Once they're merged, problem is solved.
Yeah, and I have absolutely no objection to following the process and filling out the correct paperwork. Being a former auditor, I love having all my T's crossed and I's dotted. As a participant in many efforts, I would need some assistance and some project management to help set up specific times to walk through and talk through the paperwork. But I think it's not a big ask to ask the working groups to go through and do something lightweight. But I personally would need a little help in scheduling and setting up and carving off time to walk through the template.
Got it. It looks like Jay may be being volunteered to help with that. Or voluntold. I'm not quite sure what the relationship is there, but I would echo both what Brian and Abhishek said. Right, it is let's try to be pragmatic and keep. I want to have it. If we have disagreements or we need to hold a more formalized conversation on a particular situation, then yes, we should go do that by all stretch of the imagination. That being said, though, if there are clear, obvious classifications that there's no dissension in the group, I don't know that we necessarily need to go through and fill out the paperwork, at least in the short term. I do think there is some benefit for documentation purposes to show, hey, here's the progression that things have gone through. I want to be pragmatic of, hey, we have this process and here's a stack of paperwork that you need to now follow, versus go focus on doing more good work. I want to just make sure that we strike a reasonable balance there. So it sounds like I'm hearing consensus for asking the working group leads to come up with a list of projects that are underneath their working group, a status associated with those, or a proposed kind of classification for that, sending that back to the TAC. I would say like we could target perhaps not the next meeting, but 2 meetings from now to ultimately review that as a group, maybe drive some feedback asynchronously on that discussion, and ultimately try to drive some of those to be ratified, approved by the TAC in 2 meetings from now. Does that sound reasonable to folks? Jay, I also do see your hand up, so I want to make sure we give you a chance to speak here, since you were volunteered.
Yeah, it's with love, and then I'm actually interested in this twofold. One, to improve upon what we do as far as the life cycle of projects in each working group. I think that needs to be done anyway. Of course, having being part of a trying to bring a project into the OpenSSF period. I think there's a beginning stage that needs to happen here too, where there's very clear and concise, and I think there is. I just don't know if every working group or every chair of every working group is clued in on any nuances that are involved now, but what the proper cadences or what the steps are. Some working groups say, for instance, I'm gonna put it out. We are trying to bring in a framework, and we've approached 3 working groups. Now, this is Adrian Diglio and I were trying to bring in the OSS SSC into the work. We approached 3 of them, and all 3 working groups, they love the idea. The problem is now what the steps are, whether they're saying, hey, we vote to bring it into our working group, we incubate it here, it goes up to the TAC for approval. There is a toss-up on the step, on the steps in the process, not the process steps, just what cadence each one follows. I hope I'm being understood when I say that, but I think that might need to happen first, and then what we're talking about after, if that makes sense.
Let me try to echo back what I heard and make sure that I've got shared understanding before I comment. So it sounds like you were saying in your specific example where a new proposal coming to potentially multiple homes within the OpenSSF, like what is the actual process for reconciling what the eventual landing spot would be, and that you're not seeing clarity in that situation. Is that a fair summary of it?
Well, yeah, not only am I not seeing clarity, I think each respective working group and the members of the working group themselves are a bit shy on the clarity as well. Now forgive me if I overreach with that. I'm giving actually a little bit of leeway here, but I think that does need to be drilled down, and that level of guidance needs to be more. Okay, good. Thanks, Krobin. So you said that just got ratified with 112. So I think that needs to trickle down throughout the working group, so that's right, ironclad. So that kind of rigor is in place before we jump to the processes and steps for each working group to clear those projects with TAC.
Right. So I think I understand your point now better. My comment is this. In the short term, when I use the term housekeeping, I'm looking to classify all the existing projects, things that already are part of existing working groups, things that already have a home. And it's a matter of making sure that we have them appropriately categorized. To your point around new things, I would hope that the process is self-evident and clear for things that have a sole logical home within the OpenSSF. In the situation like you described, where there may be potential multiple homes, I would say that the TAC as kind of being in its role as providing some sort of an override or a mechanism to drive some consensus in a more forceful manner, would look to ultimately say, hey, look, if we have multiple working groups raising their hands saying we would like to sponsor this particular project or this particular effort, in some ways, I think that's great, because it shows a level of interest and a level of impact that would be certainly worth our time and worth our discussion. I would say though that like the TAC's role would ultimately be making that decision and trying to drive clarity, because what does scare me about that situation is, if we have a project that could end up in multiple different places, it does say like, okay, do we have the wrong structure? Is this an exception that ultimately is just frankly an exception and something that doesn't fit? Or is this frankly pointing out a weakness in the way that we have currently subdivided the work? I'm not trying to get into the details of your specific example right now, Jay, but I guess what I'm trying to separate is let's clean house on the projects that we already have today versus, to your point, which I think is totally fair, we need to get better experience and build the muscle memory per se with 112 now that it's ratified, get that information to be pushed down. So I think, driving to clarity, to Sarah, to your point, I think is something that will naturally occur. I just don't want to gate getting projects that are already in the OpenSSF doing good work and just cleaning up the house to ultimately be gated by a broader discussion around things that might overlap or or new problems. I guess does that make sense? I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, that makes sense, and I'm actually more speaking towards Arnold's point when it came to making the working groups, bringing the application process in, right? Sort of making the working groups do this application process. You know, we talked about the whole you know, the ones that are in, the ones that have already been graduated, you know, saying, you know, speeding them, pushing them ahead and saying, okay, these ones are already at a point where they're mature, versus ones that are new or incubating, and making them go through the application process just for the purposes, and as Arnold pointed out, documentation purposes, documentation in the repo. So when I hear that statement, and I might be misunderstanding what he's saying, when I hear that, I say, okay, since we're doing that with projects that are already in the working groups, and we're saying make them go through the process for no other reason except to make sure we have them documented properly, then at the same time, we should be reviewing the process itself in general, using something like the project that I'm talking about as a guinea pig to make sure that what we're developing is as an actual working process and system against what we already have, and then what's to come later on. So I'm thinking about scalability of what we're talking about. If that, now I could be completely misunderstanding what Arno was saying, but based on what I heard and understood, I'm thinking about trying to play both sides against the middle here, so that we have something that scales as more projects come in, and as the working groups themselves evolve, and what the scope is, and what each working group is doing. And that's all I'm saying there. I mean, maybe I'm reaching too far here, but I'm trying to think about a smart way to go about this, so that we don't have this. Well, I mean, it's continuously improving process, but you know, maybe we can foreshadow what could occur later on based on what we kind of have today.
It makes sense. What I'm trying to protect against is relitigating an evolution of 112 before we've smoke tested it, and I don't necessarily feel that pushing, you know, trying to clean up house on existing projects that are already within the OpenSSF maybe is the best way to smoke test 112 versus looking at your proposal that you're bringing forward as kind of the first one post 112 being merged. I think will help to flush out. Maybe there are things that we didn't think about and we need to iterate on. But I guess that's why I'm just fearful of over rotating on reopening discussion on, is this process even valid, before we've had a chance to, level set and provide some level of consistency, given that it took months to get 112 to the point where we were comfortable merging it. So I appreciate the comment that you're making, and I think it's a good one, but I guess smoke testing it with your proposal is a different action in my mind than going through and trying to just level set the things that are already a part of the OpenSSF that have already been voted in theory approved by the TAC before. I'm also trying to make sure that we're not making projects within the OpenSSF feel like they have to re-justify their existence within the foundation. I think that sends a very counterproductive message to the good work that's already been going on here. So I'm just trying to make sure that we strike a balance between providing good examples and good documentation for the new projects that come along, while at the same time, trying to be as expeditious as possible to getting the housekeeping done.
Yep.
So I guess what I would suggest in your particular situation would be, as Krob said, speak with the working group leads. If you end up having a situation where multiple working group leads do want to host that project, I would see the next logical step to be bring that to the TAC for discussion, and ultimately we could help drive a recommendation in terms of where that should go. I would rather the project drive that discussion independently rather than the TAC get in the middle of that. If you can reconcile it on your own, that's great. If the TAC needs to get engaged, we're more than happy to. But yeah, as Krog points out, right, we don't want to necessarily to block good work that's already happening. So this is more of a making sure that we put things in a place where they get the right support, the right guidance, and the right oversight, more so than trying to be super bureaucratic over the whole thing.
Sure.
Great. With 3 minutes now left, and thanks, Jack, for the time check. So I talked about kind of what comes after 112. Some of this I think is a very tactical discussion that we just had. Some of it I do think is more strategic in nature. And one of the roles that we do have within the broader foundation charter is setting the technical vision for the OpenSSF. And so what just given the time that we have left in this meeting, what I would ask fellow TAC members to consider is I would like to propose that we start some work to actually update/refresh the technical vision document that we have listed here. Some of it, I don't think that the vision is necessarily inaccurate, but I wonder, is it inclusive of all of the work that we have in the foundation? And also, it was published at the beginning of 2021. A lot has changed in the industry since then. And so thinking about how should we evolve that vision as a function of time is something that I think is a clear role of the TAC. As part of that discussion, I would love to do some gap analysis work. I think Krob, your reference architecture diagram probably serves as a great way to start that discussion. But we know what the things hopefully that we're looking at in the foundation, but there may be also things that the TAC feels are gaps that we need to inspire or fund new work to go be executed on. To the same thing around funding. We may have good work that we feel is underfunded, and we may be having conversations about how do we accelerate and do more of that work. We may look at other efforts going on in the ecosystem and say, hey, we really think it would be great to go fund an additional effort. I think the mobilization plan work streams certainly should play a part in this as well as work that's already been done. There is an upcoming opportunity at the LF Member Summit. We will have, I think as we mentioned in the last meeting, TAC members will be invited to a joint session with the governing board at Lake Tahoe the second week of November. I believe it's the last Friday. I think that would be a great time to drive a joint conversation between the governing board and the TAC around what do we feel like the technical vision is, what do we see as the good work that we want to continue doing more of, what are the things that we're not doing that we should be inspiring and making a call out to other member companies to help get engaged, start new projects, start new working groups. Use this as an opportunity to drive a refresh of the vision, a concise way to talk about the activity within the foundation, and use that as kind of as a compelling event to try to drive some of this to closure. So what I would ask fellow TAC members is to maybe start doing some thinking around how best we can structure that dialogue. Probably won't be best done in this particular meeting, but given that we're all time constrained, I think it's going to be a little bit tricky to try to pull some of this together. But I would like to see a refresh of that technical vision doc be something that we could achieve for the benefit of the foundation, the benefit of the ecosystem by the end of the year. So any quick closing comments or questions from TAC members? I know we're out of time. All right, and I will also, just in the benefit of for the other TAC members that were not able to attend today, I will send out an email version of that last comment to maybe spur some discussion in an async manner, so we can drive that dialogue forward. All right, thanks everybody for hanging in there for the entire meeting. Good to hear all the updates and everything, and we'll talk to you everybody soon. Take care.